Picture this. Before the world had even, figured out how to imagine a woman among the stars, one was already up there, just slipping past the clouds, totally alone, wrapped in, well, nothing but silence and steel. And there are no cheering crowds in this image. There's no global spotlight waiting for her in the dark.
Right, just isolation.
Exactly. There is just the sound of a human heartbeat inside an incredibly cramped capsule, rising higher than any woman had ever gone. And long before many people back on the ground even believed such a thing was possible, there she was, just watching the Earth shrink into this quiet, distant, blue marble.
It is such a stark, almost eerie image to start with, because we are so conditioned, right, to think of space exploration as this massive, loud, triumphant spectacle.
Oh, absolutely.
We think of the countdowns, the roaring engines, the thousands of people in mission control high-fiving. But the reality of that moment in orbit was one of profound, terrifying isolation.
It's chilling when you really put yourself in that seat, and that is exactly what we are unpacking today. So welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
We are drawing from some incredible historical analysis today, particularly the insights gathered in the book, The Weaver of the Cosmos, to really explore the astonishing 1963 journey of Valentina Tereshkova.
It's a fascinating source.
It really is. But we aren't just looking at the historical milestone of the first woman in space. For you listening, our mission today is to dig into the mechanics of her survival, the brutal realities of early spaceflight, and, honestly, this strange, almost unbelievable 2-decade institutional freeze that followed her return.
Yeah, that freeze is, well, to really understand the gravity of her journey, we have to ground ourselves in the geopolitical reality of 1963.
Right. Peak Cold War.
Exactly. This was the peak of the early space race. The sky wasn't just some scientific frontier. It was, the ultimate ideological battleground. You had the United States and the Soviet Union racing for sheer technological and political supremacy.
And their approaches were so different.
Very different. On one side, NASA was rigidly shaping its astronaut corps, pulling exclusively from military test pilots. And on the other side, the Soviet Union made this incredibly bold decision to put a woman in orbit before the Americans even considered it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you look at the selection process, the contrast is just staggering.
Yeah.
You have this high-tech battleground, like the ultimate test of human engineering.
Hooray.
NASA is using guys who have thousands of hours flying experimental supersonic jets. And the woman the Soviets chose to conquer space wasn't a traditional scientist.
Yeah, not at all.
She wasn't a seasoned military pilot either.
No, she was a factory worker. I mean, literally a textile worker who stitched cloth by day, but who had a very particular hobby in her free time.
Which was?
She was an amateur parachutist. She literally spent her weekends leaping out of airplanes.
Now, I have to push back on the logic here, because on the surface, that sounds like an insane gamble.
It does sound crazy today.
Right. It's like pulling a weekend hobbyist to go summit Mount Everest before the seasoned pros even get out of base camp. Why would a superpower, locked in the fiercest technological race in human history, risk their reputation, their prestige, and a human life on a textile worker? Was it purely just a propaganda play?
Like a way to say, look, even our ordinary citizens can beat your elite pilots.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Was it just that?
Well, it was definitely a massive propaganda play, and if we connect this to the bigger picture here, there is a deeply practical, mechanical reason behind it that often gets completely overlooked.
Okay, I'm listening.
The Soviet spacecraft at the time, the Vostok, was essentially a heavy metal sphere. It didn't glide back to Earth like the space shuttle did later.
No wings.
Right, no wings. It fell. It was a purely ballistic re-entry. The capsule was so heavy and the parachutes attached to it were so relatively rudimentary that a human being couldn't actually survive the impact of the capsule hitting the ground.
Wait, so the capsule just crashed. How did the cosmonauts survive then?
They had to eject.
You're kidding.
No, I mean it. At roughly 20,000 feet above the Earth, the hatch would blow, the cosmonaut would be physically ejected from the falling spacecraft, and they had to deploy their own personal parachute to land safely.
That is wild.
Yeah.
So parachuting wasn't just a fun weekend hobby. It was literally the single most critical survival skill for the entire mission.
Exactly. If you couldn't handle a high-altitude parachute jump, you simply couldn't fly on a Vostok. Period.
Wow.
So when the head of cosmonaut training, Nikolai Kamenin, started looking for female candidates, he didn't go to the Air Force. He couldn't. He went to the state-sponsored aero clubs. He looked for competitive skydivers.
Tereshkova had the right resume.
She had over 100 jumps under her belt.
That makes so much more sense. It completely flips the narrative for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they just, grabbed a random worker off the assembly line for a cute photo op. They needed a specific, extreme physical skill, and she had it.
Precisely. She was the daughter of the people, which looked great on posters, but she could also survive the landing.
But putting a factory worker in a spacesuit for a political victory is one thing. Keeping her alive in a vacuum is another. Because physics doesn't care about your propaganda.
It really doesn't. Physics is completely indifferent. And the physical reality of that Vostok 6 mission is almost hard to comprehend by today's standards.
Set the scene for us. What was it actually like inside?
Well, that capsule was barely over 2 meters in diameter, and it wasn't empty space, it was entirely filled with instrumentation.
2 meters.
Yeah, she was strapped into an ejection seat, wearing a bulky, fully pressurized spacesuit. She couldn't float around like you see astronauts doing on the ISS today. She could barely move her arms.
Okay, so imagine yourself strapped into Vostok 6 right now listening to this. You were sealed inside something roughly the size of a large commercial washing machine.
That's a perfect comparison.
You were strapped to a controlled explosion, shot into a vacuum, and you literally cannot stand up or stretch for days.
And almost immediately upon reaching orbit, the physiological horrors began. Space adaptation syndrome is very real.
That's the space sickness, right?
Right. Without gravity to tell your inner ear which way is up, the human brain gets incredibly confused. It induces severe nausea. And on top of that, the Vostok capsule didn't have the sophisticated stabilization thrusters we use today.
So it wasn't a smooth ride.
Not at all. It would slowly roll and drift just to maintain thermal balance, meaning the Earth and the stars were constantly tumbling outside her tiny little window.
Oh, man. It's like being trapped inside a malfunctioning carnival ride, knowing you can't get off. And if you throw up in your spacesuit, in zero gravity, that could literally be fatal.
It could aspirate right into your lungs, yes.
And she experienced this severe nausea and vertigo.
Mm.
And yet she had to stay alert because her flight involved a massive technical crisis that went completely unreported for decades.
Yeah, a closely guarded state secret.
Let's get into the mechanics of this glitch, because this is where she truly proves her mettle. What actually went wrong with the ship?
It was an error in the spacecraft's automated descent program. So, to come back to Earth, a spacecraft has to fire its retro rockets against the direction of travel to slow down.
Right, hitting the brakes.
Right. If you slow down, gravity takes over and pulls you back into the atmosphere. But the automated orientation system on Vostok 6 was programmed with an inverted control logic.
Meaning the ship was pointed the wrong way.
Precisely. Instead of orienting the spacecraft to fire the thrusters forward and brake, the system was orienting the ship to fire the thrusters backward.
Wait, so if that automated sequence had executed, instead of slowing her down and bringing her home, it would have accelerated her.
Yes.
Because in orbit, accelerating doesn't just make you go faster along the same path, it pushes your orbit higher.
It would have pushed her apogee, that's the highest point of her orbit, further out into space. She would have been completely stranded.
Oh my God.
The capsule only had a limited amount of life support. If she had allowed that automated program to run, she would have slowly run out of oxygen and died in orbit.
And she is dealing with this while fighting off severe, continuous space sickness.
She communicates this error to ground control, and they have to scramble to verify it. So she essentially has to manually input a new descent program while locked in a tumbling metal sphere, feeling incredibly ill.
That is just terrifying.
She had to manually align the spacecraft using a very rudimentary optical device in her window, fighting the nausea the whole time to ensure the ship was perfectly positioned before the retro rockets fired.
And she pulled it off.
She did it. She executed the correction flawlessly.
The sheer endurance required is staggering. She didn't just go up, do one quick orbit, and come down. How long was she up there?
She orbited the Earth 48 times. She was in space for nearly 3 full days.
3 days in a washing machine while sick. And we really need to pause here and synthesize the historical weight of those 48 orbits based on what the Weaver of the Cosmos points out.
Yeah, the math is incredible.
With that single mission, Valentina Tereshkova surpassed the combined flight time of every single American astronaut who had flown up to that point.
It's true. All of the Mercury missions, John Glenn, Alan Shepard, all of their hours in space combined didn't equal what she did on that one single flight.
While the United States was still debating whether women had the right stuff to even pass a basic physical, she was up there lapping the planet.
Jamming it 48 times.
It completely shatters the narrative of the era. So she conquers the physical challenges, fixes a deadly glitch, ejects at 20,000 feet, and lands safely in rural Russia.
She returns a massive hero.
Logically, you would think the argument is over right then and there. The floodgates for women in aerospace should have been permanently open.
You would certainly think so. And on the surface, it was an undeniable triumph. She toured the world. She was paraded as the ultimate proof that the physical and intellectual limits society placed on women were entirely fabricated.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because history takes a bizarre turn right here. We have this undeniable success, a proven track record. But then the doors just slam shut.
Tightly shut.
It took nearly 2 decades before another woman flew in space. Svetlana Savitskaya didn't fly until 1982, and Sally Ride in 1983. Why the 20-year freeze? How does an institution pull off a historic success and then actively decide to never do it again for an entire generation?
It really comes down to the difference between a political stunt and actual institutional change. Once the Soviet Union checked the box of first woman in space, the political objective was achieved. They had their victory.
So the science didn't matter as much as the headline.
Exactly. And the chief designer of the Soviet space program, Sergei Korolev, was known to be incredibly stressed by the risks of human spaceflight. After Tereshkova's flight, he reportedly complained heavily about the difficulties she experienced with space sickness and the operational headaches.
Really?
Yeah, he essentially decided the female cosmonaut program was more trouble than it was worth and shut it down.
Which is incredibly hypocritical, isn't it? Because the weaver of the cosmos brings up German Titov. He was the male cosmonaut who flew Vostok 2, and he experienced the exact same debilitating space sickness.
He's terribly sick, yes.
It's a physiological reaction to zero gravity, not a gendered one. But when a man gets sick, it's just space adaptation syndrome. When a woman gets sick, it's suddenly proof that women aren't suited for space.
That is textbook confirmation bias. The systemic structures of the 1960s were just looking for any excuse to revert to the status quo. In the Soviet Union, the political machinery got their propaganda photos and then quietly dissolved the female cosmonaut detachment.
Just brushed it under the rug.
Right. And in the United States, the barrier was even more institutionalized.
Right, because NASA had that infamous requirement. All astronauts had to be graduates of military test pilot schools.
Exactly. It was a brilliant, if infuriating, bureaucratic catch-22. NASA could legally say, hey, we aren't banning women, we just require military test pilot experience.
But since the Department of Defense strictly barred women from flying military jets,
it was mathematically impossible for a woman to qualify.
they built a wall and then pointed to the wall as if it were a natural phenomenon.
That's a great way to put it.
And there was a group of women, often called the Mercury 13, who pass all the exact same brutal physiological tests as the male astronauts at the Lovelace Clinic. They proved they could handle the G-forces, the isolation, the sensory deprivation.
Some of them actually scored better than the men.
Exactly. And NASA still refused to even consider them.
What's fascinating here is the sheer inertia of history. Tereshkova provided quiet, undeniable proof that the barriers were artificial. But proof isn't enough to change a paradigm if the people controlling the gates absolutely refuse to look at it.
They just closed their eyes.
Essentially, yes. Tereshkova was, tragically, first too early.
First too early.
Yeah.
I like that. She orbited a world that simply hadn't caught up to her yet. The technology was clearly ready, but the sociology was 20 years behind.
It speaks to how deeply ingrained those limitations were. Sometimes it takes a whole generation for the reality of what happened to finally seep into the institutions that control access.
Yeah.
She stood at the literal pinnacle of human achievement and then essentially had to wait 2 decades for everyone else to arrive.
I want to take a step back from the politics for a moment, the gatekeeping and the institutional sexism of the Cold War. Let's go back up to orbit.
Okay.
Imagine being inside Vostok 6 again. The retro-rocket glitch is finally fixed. The intense nausea has kind of subsided into a dull hum. You are weightless. You have a moment of quiet, and you look out that thick glass porthole.
And what she sees is profound. Beyond the mechanics and the politics, there is a deep philosophical shift that happens to people who go up there.
The overview effect, right?
Yes, the overview effect. Tereshkova noted that seeing the curve of the horizon made the world feel incredibly fragile. The atmosphere looks like this paper-thin halo of blue light protecting everything we know from the absolute void of space.
You see a world without borders.
Yes. From 200 kilometers up, the literal lines drawn on maps completely disappear. There is no iron curtain visible from orbit.
It's just land and water.
Exactly. The intense, heated human arguments, The Cold War ideologies, the constant threat of nuclear annihilation, even the petty debates over who belonged in a cockpit, all of it felt impossibly distant.
It puts everything into scale.
She realized that from a high enough vantage point, all the artificial divisions we create down here start to fade into irrelevance. You are just looking at one single interconnected system.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? When we look back at this 1963 journey, the story of the cloth weaver who chased the sky, we aren't just looking at a piece of neat space trivia.
Not at all.
Tereshkova didn't just break a physical boundary. She didn't just master orbital mechanics while violently ill in a tumbling metal sphere. She sought a fundamental truth about unity that, frankly, most of humanity still struggles to grasp today.
Once you've seen that perspective, it's hard to ever see the world the same way again. It really highlights the absurdity of the limits we place on each other down here on the ground.
It really does.
Which brings up an important reflection to carry with you after we wrap up this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
If Tereshkova proved that physical borders and the societal limits placed on women were entirely artificial constructs, illusions that are only visible when you are stuck on the ground, it raises a pretty profound question about your own reality.
Love where this is going.
What other impossible limits in your own life or in your industry or in society right now are you accepting as an undeniable law of nature? What barriers are you treating as walls of solid steel, just waiting for you to get a high enough vantage point to see they don't actually exist at all?